What's up, y'all? It's the Shield Brother here for the History Armada. Welcome back to part 6 of the history of the Germanic States. And today on this episode, we've made it to the German Empire. Today we're going to be talking about the formation, the history of the German Empire, what it is, how long it lasted. So, the German Empire. In 1866, the German Confederation was dissolved. In its place, the North German Federation, which we talked about at the end of last week's video, was established under the leadership of Prussia. Yet again, top of the food chain there. Austria was excluded, and the Austrian influence in Germany that had begun in the 15th century finally came to an end. So here we see the end of Austrian influences on the other Germanic states. The North German Federation was a transitional organization that existed from 1867 to 1871, between the dissolution of the German Confederation and the founding of the German Empire. So, in summary, we see the end of the Austrian influence, we see the rise of Prussia at the head of the North German Confederation, and then we see the establishment of a German Empire, and you can see the different Germanic states that were within the empire on your right there. So, first off, Imperial Germany from 1871 to 1918, which was the Kaiser's empire, was united by Otto von Bismarck into a German Reich. He determined German politics until 1890. Bismarck tried to foster alliances within Europe, on one hand to contain France, and on the other hand to consolidate Germany's influence within Europe. On the domestic front, Bismarck tried to stem the rise of socialism by anti-socialist laws, combined with an introduction of healthcare and social security enforced by him. At the same time, Bismarck tried to reduce the political influence of the emancipated Catholic minority of the Kulturkampf, literally a cultural struggle that he had. The Catholics only grew stronger, forming the Center Party. And in 1888, the young and ambitious Kaiser Wilhelm II became Emperor of the German Empire. He could not abide advice, least of all from the most experienced politician and diplomat in Europe, so he fired Bismarck. But that brings us to the age of Bismarck. On the 18th of January in 1871, the German Empire is proclaimed in the halls of mirrors of the Palace of Versailles. Bismarck appears in the white, which I'll show you the painting later. And this is a new empire within the age of Bismarck. Like, this is the age where, if you've seen my earlier video on Bismarck, you see all of his influence, all of his realpolitik, all of his different tactics that he uses to really consolidate this new German Empire. And so there was disputes between France and Prussia, and they rapidly increased after the formation of this empire. In 1868, the Spanish Queen Isabella II was expelled by a revolution, leaving the country's throne vacant. While Prussia tried to put a Hohenzollern candidate, Prince Leopold, on the Spanish throne, the French angrily protested this. In July 1870, France declared war on Prussia, starting the Franco-Prussian War. The debacle was swift. A succession of German victories in northeastern France followed, and one French army was besieged at Metz. After a few weeks, the main army was finally forced to capitulate in the fortress of Sedan. French Emperor Napoleon III was taken prisoner, and a republic was hastily proclaimed in Paris. The new government, realizing that a victorious Germany would demand territorial acquisitions, resolved to fight on. They began to muster new French armies, and the Germans settled down for a very grim siege of Paris. The starving city surrendered in January of 1871, and the Prussian army staged a victory parade within it. France was forced to pay indemnities of 5 billion francs and cede Alsace-Lorraine to the Prussians. It was a bitter peace that would leave the French thirsting for revenge. Remember that for when we come to the First World War. During the siege of Paris, the German princes assembled in the Hall of Mirrors of the Palace of Versailles and proclaimed the Prussian king Wilhelm I as the first German emperor of this new German Empire on the 18th of January 1871. The German Empire was thus founded, and within the German states and the Germanic princedoms, they were unified into a single economic, political, and administrative unit. The empire comprised 25 states, 3 of which were Hanseatic-free cities. It was dubbed the Little German Solution since it excluded the Austrian territories of the Habsburgs. Bismarck again was appointed to serve as chancellor. The new empire was characterized by great enthusiasm and vigor, and there was heroic artwork and imitation of Greek and Roman styles and a lot of romanticism going on, especially after their victory over the French is concluded. Bismarck's domestic policies as Chancellor of Germany were characterized by his fight against perceived enemies of the Protestant Prussian state. In the Kulturkampf, or the Culture War, he tried to minimize various measures like the introduction of civil marriage, but without much success. The Kulturkampf antagonized many Protestants as well as Catholics and was eventually abandoned by Bismarck. Millions of non-German subjects in the German Empire, like the Polish, Danish, and French minorities, were discriminated against under Bismarck's reign as Chancellor, and a policy of Germanization was implemented. So this is the painting I was telling you. Bismarck can be seen in the white. This is the creation of the new empire underneath Wilhelm I, etc. And then, so that brings us to the classes within this new German empire. So there was the aristocracy. The new empire provided rich new opportunities at the top for the nobility of Prussia and the other states to try and fill. They dominated the diplomatic service, the army, and the civil services. Through their control of the civil service, the aristocracy had a dominant voice in decisions affecting the universities and the churches within this empire. In 1914, Germany's diplomats consisted of 8 princes, 29 counts, 20 barons, and 54 other nobles, and a mere 11 commoners. So that makes about roughly 64-ish nobles and 11 commoners, really showing the disadvantage commoners had when it came to affecting the lifestyle within the empire. The commoners were chiefly the sons of leading industrialists or bankers at this time. Almost all of the diplomats had been socialized into the feudal students' corps of the university. So power increasingly was centralized within this empire in the national capital of Berlin, including neighboring Potsdam, where 7,000 aristocrats drew a sharp line between themselves and everyone else. Berlin's rapidly increasing rich middle class aped and copied the aristocracy and tried to marry into it. So there was this aristocracy, these aristocrats, and the others were always trying to kind of get a piece of this pie. And the rich middle class were trying to marry into it and trying to sway the politics so that they could affect how the layout of the German Empire really was. And then there was the middle class. Germany's middle class base was in the cities, and it grew exponentially, although it never gained the political power it had in France, Britain, or the United States. The German middle class was rather just that, a middle class. The Bund Deutscher Frauenverein, or the Association of German Women's Organizations, was established in 1894 to encompass the women's organizations that had sprung up since the 1860s. From the beginning, they were a bourgeois organization, its members working toward equality with men in such areas as education, financial opportunities, and political life. Working class women were not welcome. They were organized by the socialists. So the bourgeois women had their own little party that they were trying to get equal rights to their men, and the other working class and middle class working women, they were stuck in a socialist party trying to gain equality at this time within the empire. So the working class, the rise of the Socialist Workers' Party, declared its aim to establish peacefully a new socialist order through the transformation of existing political and social conditions within this German empire. From 1878, Bismarck tried to repress the social democratic movement by outlawing the party's organization. It assembled and most of its new newspapers. When it finally was allowed to run candidates, the Social Democrats were stronger than ever. Bismarck built on a tradition of welfare programs in Prussia and Saxony that began as early as the 1840s. In the 1880s, Bismarck introduced old age pensions, accident insurance, medical care, and unemployment insurance that formed the basis of the modern European welfare system that is and the welfare state that is used now. His paternal kind of programs won the support of the German industry because its goals were to win the support of the working class for the empire and reduce the outflow of immigrants to the Americas, because at this time the Germanic peoples were still rapidly immigrating to America. Bismarck further won the support of both industry and skilled workers by his high tariff policies, which protected profits and wages from American competition, although they alienated the liberal intellectuals who wanted free trade. So here you can see the culture comp between him and the Pope and Cardinal is depicted on the right. So this was kind of... Well, Bismarck would not tolerate any power outside of Germany having any influence within the empire, as in Rome having a say in German affairs and lifestyles. He launched a culture comp against the power of the Pope and the Catholic Church in 1873, but only in Prussia. They gained strong support from German liberals who saw the Catholic Church as a bastion of reaction and their greatest enemy at the time. The Catholic element, in turn, saw the National Liberals as its worst fear and formed the Center Party to kind of try and combat these National Liberals at the time within the German Empire. Catholics, although nearly a third of the national population of the empire were Catholics, were seldom allowed to hold major positions in the imperial government or the Prussian government. After 1871, there was a systematic purge of the remaining Catholics from their positions of power. In the powerful Interior Ministry, which handled all police affairs, the only Catholic was a messenger boy. Jews were likewise heavily discriminated against in these types of positions. Most of the culture comp was fought out in Prussia, but Imperial Germany passed the pulpit law, which made it a crime for any cleric to discuss public issues in a way that displeased the government, meaning that no minister or cardinal or bishop or anybody, no church-related person could have a sermon or a speech on a attitude that was disagreeing or negative towards the imperial authority. So, although he ultimately failed with his culture comp, and that brings us to the Wilhelmian era. Wilhelm II, in 1888, Emperor Wilhelm I died at the age of 90. His son Frederick III, the hope of German liberals, was already stricken with throat cancer and died 3 months later. Frederick's son, Wilhelm II, then became emperor at the age of 29. Having had a problematic relationship with his liberal parents, Wilhelm had early on decided to renew the top level of the state. The 2 years that Bismarck remained in office feigned to continue, but a difference of opinion on the social politics, such as an excuse for the younger Kaiser to force the Chancellor into retirement in March of 1890. Following a principle known as personal regiment, Wilhelm aimed to exercise influence on every government decision that was made. The young Kaiser Wilhelm sought aggressively to increase Germany's influence in the world affairs, and this was called the Welt politic, the world politics. After the removal of Bismarck from office, foreign policy was in the hands of the erratic Kaiser, who played an increasingly reckless game, and the powerful the Foreign Office under the leadership of Frederick von Holstein. The Foreign Office argued that first, a long-term coalition between France and Russia had to fall apart. Secondly, Russia and Britain would never get together, and finally, Britain would eventually seek an alliance with Germany. Germany refused to renew its treaties with Russia, but Russia did form a closer relationship with France in the dual alliance of 1894. But Russia, seeking to do this, kind of initiated a distrust within the German peoples. Furthermore, Anglo-German relations cooled as Germany aggressively tried to build a new empire and engaged in a naval race with Britain. London refused to agree to the formal alliance that Germany sought. Berlin's analysis proved mistaken on every one of those 3 points, leading to Germany's increasing isolation and distrust of its neighbors, and its dependence on the Triple Alliance, which brought together Germany, Austro-Hungarian, and the Italians. The Triple Alliance was undermined by differences between Austria and Italy, and in 1915, Italy would switch sides. Meanwhile, the German Navy under Admiral Alfred von Tirpitz had ambitions to rival the Great British Navy. And ultimately, this would lead to the negotiations for an alliance between Germany and Britain breaking down. The British, however, kept well ahead in the naval race by the introduction of the highly advanced new Dreadnought-class battleship in 1907. In the first Moroccan crisis of 1905, Germany nearly came to blows with Britain and France when the latter attempted to establish a protectorate over Morocco. The Germans were upset at having not been informed about the French intentions of Morocco, and declared that their support for Moroccan independence. Wilhelm II made a highly provocative speech regarding this. The following year, a conference was held in which all of the European powers except Austria-Hungary sided with French, and by this time Austria-Hungary was now little more than really a German satellite. A compromise was brokered by the United States where the French relinquished some, but not all, control of Morocco. This led to the Second Moroccan Crisis in 1911. It saw another dispute over Morocco erupt when the French tried to suppress a revolt there. Germany, still smarting from the previous quarrel and really upset about this, agreed to a settlement whereby the French ceded some of the territory in Central Africa in exchange for Germany's renouncing any right to intervene in Moroccan affairs. This confirmed French control over Morocco, which became a full protectorate of the country in 1912. So, the economy was continued to be industrialized and urbanized at this time within this new German Empire, with heavy industry, especially coal and steel, becoming important within the empire, especially in Ruhr, and manufacturing growing in the cities. The cities rapidly grew thanks to the manufacturing, as well as depending on this manufacturing system and this new form of income. And Bismarck's new tariff on the imported grain was the introduction of the sugar beet as a main crop, bringing more agricultural focus to this new empire. So even so, farms were small in size, and women did much of the field work at this time. An unintended consequence was the increased dependence on migratory foreign labor. Based on its leadership in chemical research in universities and industrial laboratories, Germany became dominant in the world's chemical industry in the late 19th century. At first, the production of dyes was very critical for its trade, as well as kind of getting its foot in the door with relations. Germany became Europe's leading steel producing nation in the 1890s, thanks in large part to the protection from American and British competition afforded by tariffs and cartels. The leading firm was Friedrich Krupp's AG Hoch Krupp, run by the Krupp family. The merger of several major firms into a United Steelworks in 1926 was modeled in the U.S. Steel Corporation in the United States, and this new company emphasized on rationalizing of management structures and modernization within the industries of the steelworks. By 1913, American and German exports dominated the world steel market, as Britain slipped into third place. In machinery, iron and steel, and other industries, German firms avoided cutthroat competition, and instead the German Empire relied on associations of trade associations and industry associations. Germany was a world leader because of its prevailing corporatist mentality, its strong bureaucratic tradition, and the encouragement of the government. These associations regulated competition and allowed small firms to function in the shadow of much larger companies, but in kind of a odd type of peace. So, they did have colonies, which, as I said, they took in the middle of Africa as well as along the coast. You can see the colonies there on your left. By the 1890s, German colonial expansion in Asia and the Pacific, as well as the Marianas, the Caroline Islands, and Samoa, led to frictions with Britain, Russia, Japan, and the United States. The construction of the Baghdad Railroad and its railways would be financed by German banks. And it was designed to eventually connect Germany with the Turkish Empire and the Persian Gulf. But it also collided with British and Russian geopolitical interests. The largest colonial enterprises were in Africa at this time. The harsh treatment of the Nama and the Hirioro of what is now Namibia in 1906 and 1907 led to charges of genocide against the Germans in their colonies. Historians are examining the links and precedents between the Hirioro and the Namakwe genocides within Africa and the Holocaust of the 1940s. Those two are being compared in its drastic effects and its multitude and magnitude by the German people. So it's very unfortunate that their colonies would take such a dark, drastic turn. But that is the new German Empire that is formed. If you come back next week, we will be talking about the Great War, the First World War, and the German part and its effects and its events within this war and what led up to it. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, go ahead and leave me a like. If you did not, leave me a dislike. As always, this has been the Shield Brother for the History Armada with another episode of the History of the Germanic States, and I'll catch y'all next time.